Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian, up here on Capitol Hill at the Rayburn House Office Building to have a conversation with Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger, Democrat from the 2nd District of Maryland. You're a House Appropriator on the Defense Committee and former on the Intelligence Committee. Sir, I want to start off with the appropriations process. Sure. You guys have been working on your bill in a very dedicated fashion. What are some of the priorities we're going to see reflected in your legislation?
First thing is that we had to deal with the issue of sequestration. So the budget that we just voted on, which will hopefully allow us to have the increases that we need for our military, we can't cut everything across the board. That's what the sequestration law does. It makes our military weaker. Budgeting is about priorities, and we have clearly priorities as it relates to our national security and the threats of the Russians, the Chinese, ISIS, Iran, North Korea. It's a very dangerous world out there. And the Appropriations Committee, we have what we call regular order, which is good, which means we have people come before our committees, they testify before us, we ask them questions, and we ask them questions about their expertise and what they're doing. And that's the process that we're in right now. And we'll be finished that process very soon. And then when we voted for the budget, in the budget, we will put in what we call an omnibus bill, which is they pull everything in together and we pass it, and we will get the issues, hopefully, that were in our budget. It then has to go to the Senate. The Senate has to do the same thing, pass the bill. It then goes to the president for his signature, and then it becomes law. We need this. China and Russia are spending a tremendous amount of money, especially China, in the space programs, in anything, submarines, aircraft carriers, all the things that we have done and why we were the most powerful country in the world, we started to slip because of sequestration. So this increase that we will be able to have, over $60 billion for our military, will help us catch up and get back to be #1 in the world as far as national security.
Let me ask you about the process. In the 1970s, the process was reordered in part because it's been so difficult to get an appropriations bill. Is it time for another reform? And if so, what does that reform need to look like? Do the departments, for example, need to have more time to spend, or do we need to go to 2-year appropriations? What's your sense?
Well, anything that we can make it better. The most important thing is to do away, #1, with sequestration. The second thing we have to do is do what we call regular order, that every bill comes before the committee, you debate it, you have witnesses that testify. Now, whether or not we do 2 years instead of 1 year, that just depends on the situation. More importantly, I think we need to get earmarks back. Earmarks are extremely important. You know, right now, I know my district better than anybody who works on the Hill as far as a bureaucrat in the Hill. I know I have 2 Army bases, Fort Meade, I have NSA, and I have Aberdeen. Now, you know, I know not only the issues that they need to function every day, but when you have a facility like that, you have issues involving roads, infrastructure, those type of things. So earmarks were abused by a very few individuals in Congress. Earmarks have been reformed, and yet the public feels that earmarks are bad where they are not. They vote for me, they vote for their member of Congress, and we know more about the district, again, than the bureaucrats in Washington.
Do you think Adam Smith, the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, is one of the people up here who thinks that this funding increase will be 18 months or 2 years, that the debt is going to catch up with the nation and there's going to have to be some spending reductions that are going to come down the pike? Are you one of the members who feels that way, or do you think that defense spending can be sustained over a longer period of time?
Right now, the focus is to pick the priorities and where we need to go to make sure that we stay ahead of Russia and China or any other threats that we have. And I was concerned about voting for that budget because of the deficit that it creates. But I think we're so far behind because of sequestration, we have to make sure that we take care of the priorities first, and then we'll start looking at where we need to go. Another thing we need to do is that we need to go further as far as just we have a 2-year plan. We need to really cut the sequestration issue and then start giving the military what they need. But we can't forget domestic either. There needs to be a balance. When I was a former Baltimore County executive, in my budgeting process where I had to balance the budget, it was balanced between law enforcement, education, those other issues too.
What are the priorities? Where do you think the money should be going? I mean, if you were the one, if you were king for the day and you were the one who was going to be making the decisions, what do you think the priorities are going to be given your defense and intelligence background?
I work in cyber, I think cybersecurity. You know, people would say to me when I was the ranking member on Intel and the Gang of 8, and we got the most sensitive information, what keeps you up at night? I'd say #1, spicy Mexican food. Secondly, though, you have to look at the area of nuclear weapons. Very serious. You know, if Russia, China, and the United States get into a nuclear war, the Earth could be over as we know it. We're still in a position where we can stop Iran or North Korea. But as far as those three countries, the technology isn't there for us to stop it once we get going. So you really have to focus on that. You then have to deal with the issues of space. And, you know, space is, we became the most powerful country in the world because we controlled the sky. When the Russians came out with Sputnik, we responded by putting billions of dollars into space. And we focused on space. Now, space, we don't own space. You've got the Russians, the Chinese, and they're right next to us. And, you know, if there's ever a war, I see cyber attacks and attacking our satellites, because the satellites are our eyes and ears, you know, throughout the world. So we know what's happening in North Korea, know what's happening in Iran, know what's happening in other countries.
You mentioned that Fort Meade. It's in your district. National Security Agency is there. The National Security Agency is there, and we just heard from Admiral Mike Rogers, the director of the NSA, as well as the commander of U.S. Cyber Command last week, talking about not having received any direct guidance in how to respond to the Russians, given the tampering, not only just in the elections, but that it's continuing. He made clear in testimony before the Senate last week that Russia is going to keep doing what it's doing until it gets pushed back.
I agree that Russia will.
And so what's the best way to, I mean, first, is the United States doing enough to respond? And if not, what's Congress's role?
I'm not going to get into a lot of this because it could be classified, but I can tell you this, I have a tremendous amount of respect for General Mattis. And, you know, unfortunately, we know about Trump. I'm not going to get into those political issues. But I believe at this point, which allows me to sleep better at night, that he does respect General Mattis, who is so calm. I mean, he was the commander of Iraq, Afghanistan. He's brilliant. He knows what he's doing. And if you notice, whenever Trump says crazy things, which happens usually every day, the Mattis will respond if he thinks it's wrong. Just when the president talked about the issue without talking to anybody, about the tariffs and that type of thing, and how he came out and said, I'm worried this will hurt us with our allies. So as long as Mattis is there, I think we're okay, because Trump, for some reason, lets Mattis do his thing, which is very competent and qualified, and he doesn't stop him. When Trump would say, we're going to take your oil in Iraq, he went over to Iraq and said, no, we're going to fight together to take out ISIS. And the president lets him get away with that.
Is there a danger, though, among our allies if the United States doesn't more forcefully or somehow more publicly respond? Is that an issue, given Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, and so many four of our allied leaders are raising the alarm bell that the United States and its allies have to do a better job pushing back against Russia's meddling?
We have serious problems with our relationship with all of our allies. And what's happening to the State Department is very, very serious. The degradation of the State Department has to stop. General Mattis said it. If the State Department becomes weaker, I have to double the military. This is wrong. So it's an international issue that we have to deal with and make sure we rebuild our State Department, because we've lost a lot of good people as a result of this president's policies.
Is there bipartisan support for bringing some of that money back to the State Department?
I think we're working on it. I'm on one of the defense committees. I mean, on the State and Foreign Ops, we're trying to work. It's bipartisan. And these things that I'm saying about the president, it's a bipartisan issue. We know that there are problems, and we've got to make sure that the president's staff understands this and works hard to make sure that we need to continue to be the strongest country in the world.
Two quick questions. One, North Korea, you mentioned North Korea, you know, as being something that would keep you up at night when you were the ranking member on intelligence. Are you encouraged?
It's more Russia and China and ISIS, but North Korea is bad too. So.
Talk to us a little bit. What do you think of some of the developments that have happened, the meeting that happened between the North and South Koreans, and the North Koreans putting on the table that, hey, they would be willing to discuss denuclearization? As somebody who's been looking at this issue, what's the right way ahead?
I think the rhetoric has to stop, and hopefully it's starting to stop right now. North Korea is a very dangerous country, but they've got sophistication. They've got nuclear weapons. They know the cyber field. But you always want to, your goal is peace, not war. If the United States would go one-on-one with North Korea, we would blow them out of the water, there's no question. But look at the loss of lives. How many people from South Korea would be impacted, our allies? You know, we have 30,000 military over in South Korea. So anytime we can sit down and resolve and work through these issues, that's the priority. And you know, it's about relationships and trust. Now, if South Korea can develop a communication with North Korea, and but yet in order to get there, we have to put sanctions on them. We have to make it tough for them. But eventually, you would hope a leader, whoever that person, would want to do what's right for his country. And when your people are starving, and because of what you're doing, what your policies are, then sooner or later, you would hope that they try to work something out. And I think these sanctions are working. Just like we have sanctions with Russia, we need more. Trump, for what, his bromance with Putin, that's where it is, and nothing we can do about it. But the sanctions can work after a period of time if it's going to affect your economy or affect your people.
Last question on both on space but also on nuclear. We heard last week at the space conference you were participating in at CSIS that there are more priorities than there is money, which is always a challenge. On the nuclear, it's the same thing. The last administration started talking about $1 trillion is what it's going to take to revitalize the nuclear enterprise, and we just have a nuclear posture review out. On both of these, what do you think the nation's space priorities need to be? What do you think the nation's nuclear priorities need to be?
Well, first thing, the nuclear, we want less nuclear, but the way Russia is acting now and other countries, we have to be prepared ourselves. So the less we can have, the better. There's an issue of Russia wanting to have smaller nuclear weapons, and are we ready for that? If they don't want a major nuclear war, which could be the end of the earth, but that could also have other countries want to get involved, and that might even make it worse. So these are things we have to look at. As far as space is concerned, I'm not going to get into that because a lot of it's classified. I mean, I think we know what we do in space, but it's just not about defense and national security. And we use space every day, GPS systems, communication systems. People don't even realize how important space is, and we have got to be the leaders in space. So we have a lot of cleaning up to do as far as the amount of money that's been going into space because of sequestration. And the good news, we passed this budget. We get it passed in the Senate. I think we'll be okay.
Sir, thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Okay, good. Take care.